This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Here is one of the most bizarre experiences of my life. So I was in my mid-20s and in my first corporate job when my male boss invited me to a meeting in his office. I sat down ready to discuss something important, business, when he started with telling me, Anna, your life is not a real life. This life of being a spoiled princess with famous parents and attending private schools is not real life. Real life is my life because I grew up in a farm in the Austrian Alps, surrounded with 6 brothers and sisters. I do not remember how this conversation ended. I just know that thankfully I did not start discussing this topic with him. Thankfully, I was too shocked to react, and I just left wondering what the hell was this right now. But I was extremely hurt, and I was hurt because of what he did not know. He did not know about the domestic violence that traumatized me because I witnessed it as a child. He did not know that I spent my teens in a very painful metal corset that reached up to my neck 23 hours a day. He did not know that at 15 I had to undergo an extremely difficult back surgery. He did not know that it took me a year to recover, out of which 6 months I spent in a cast that covered my whole torso, and the next 6 months in yet another metal corset. He did not know that when I finally recovered from this difficult surgery, the war broke out in my country, and I witnessed a very, very bloody, traumatizing war. And I spent hours in a shelter during an air raid and escaped to Austria as a war refugee. And yes, I attended a private school, but this is because I did not speak German, and the American International School was very kind to offer me a scholarship so I could continue my studies because I've already lost a year of my education due to my surgery. What I'm aiming at is not to judge people's lives by what we think we see, because we have no idea what is really going on, especially not now during the times of Instagram and social media, where we are bombarded with other people's perfect pictures, but rarely they share what's really going on. But the other topic is that what seems perfect doesn't necessarily mean it's perfect, and it doesn't mean that it's fulfilling. As my guest Amy says, perfect doesn't mean happy. She's talking about her grandmother and her mother, who both lived lives that on the outside seemed perfect. Beautiful, perfect, healthy family, wonderful husbands, cars, houses in suburbia, jewelry. But her mother has not been fulfilled. And it's very important as a reminder to not get stuck into this perfect, seemingly perfect life, and to always look for fulfillment, for our place in this world, for our voice, our creativity, and the ways we can contribute to our happiness and fulfillment. So on this note, enjoy. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider and my guest today is Amy Weinland Daughters. Amy is a sports journalist and author of Dear Dana, That Time I Went Crazy and Wrote All 580 of My Facebook Friends a Handwritten Letter. That's a name for a book. And You Cannot Mess This Up, a true story that never happened. Amy currently lives in Tomball, Texas, with her husband and two sons. Hi, Amy, welcome.
Hi, Anna. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
I am also very, very excited. I just read You Cannot Mess This Up, and this is going to be the major topic, I think, for our conversation today. Will you tell me a little bit about the book?
Right. I had this book idea for years. I thought what I'll do is I'll write myself back in time to my own childhood. And basically the premise is I'm flying home for some meetings and I'm transported back to my childhood in 1978 when I'm 10 years old. And my travel guide drops me off at my childhood home and says, "You have to spend 36 hours here. These people think you're a distant cousin from another state." And so I go inside and I'm forced to spend 36 hours with my parents who are the same age as me in the made up story. And then my older sister who I've always been jealous of, 12-year-old, my younger brother who's 8 in the story, and then my 10-year-old self. And so I told you this in our pre-conversation, but I went into this thinking I'm going to write a funny back in time book. And that was my whole intention, Anna. And then when I started writing my funny back in time book, I realized if you're going to write yourself back, and this is so relatable to your own childhood, and look at the memories you made as a 10-year-old, as a 48-year-old, as an adult with a life experience, everything's going to look different and you're going to have to reconsider everything. So I ended up writing a catharsis without meaning to.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How memoirs do that. They're really, really, they're very difficult. When I wrote my second book, Tito Land, the memoir of my childhood, I spent days lying on the floor crying. It was very, very difficult, but it was also, like your experience, very cathartic. And it, like your book, and you finished the book saying that after the book was published, you sat down with your mom and you had a conversation with her in which you told her, as you say, in real words, about certain things and experiences that were never spoken about. And I understand she did not respond. You didn't have a conversation about it, but still the fact that, is that correct? But still the fact that you managed to say it out loud and you said it to her, you never spoke about this again, but some things were cleared out, and that was very healing.
Oh, and it transformed not only me. I went into this book one person. I would have never had that conversation without writing the book. And then I finished this book a totally different person. And I think without me ever, I've always assumed that if I was going to address my mother about the things that I remembered or I was troubled by or the way I remembered them, that was going to lead to us even being more fractured. And in fact, what happened was it brought us closer together. And I think the truth, or my version of it, and her allowing me to present that, brought us closer rather than pulling us apart, which is a fascinating statement. But I'm talking about one individual mother-daughter relationship. Every
Yeah.
relationship's so different. I think that's careful to point out.
Very, very different. Very different. I had a similar experience. Again, this is why writing memoirs is such a deep and interesting experience. And in Titoland, I did write certain memories or experiences in my childhood that I never actually spoke to my parents about directly. I never really told them, "You've done this and this and this hurt me," and they both read it in the book, and it was great for all three of us. It was great. My father did apologize for certain things and say, "I was never worried this hurt you so much," and as did my mom. And that was, and as you said, and I think this is a very important point, you don't need to discuss it. It doesn't need to be discussed anymore. It doesn't need to drag on. It's important that it's out there and you say, "Listen, this hurt me and this was not okay, but I still love you."
Right. And but the truth actually enhances that as opposed to, it takes away from it. Since we didn't talk, I grew up in the 70s and we did not talk about a lot of things, which sounds like our experiences were very similar, but putting it out there, really is healing just in the fact, like you said, it's not discussed, it's not turned over, just the fact that it's recognized, acknowledged, and
Yes.
then the grace in loving each other anyway is such an important part of the human experience, because you could direct that the other direction and think about our own children and think, well, that was one of my big takeaways from the book. I hope they don't write a book about this, because I just did the best I could. Like, I know my mother did, but that doesn't mean it was perfect. And then therefore everybody is getting let off the hook. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways for me from the story of writing the story.
Amy, I'd like to hear a little bit about Dear Dana, this book with a crazy, crazy title. But before that, this book is, you cannot mess this up, is a lot about memories, and how they're pliable, and how they change with time and with our experiences. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Right. And I kind of spoke about it earlier, but if you think about, and go like picking a part of your time, a part of the time of your life and going back to that time and trying to relive that at the age and experience level you are now. Well, then you're obviously going to see things through a different lens. And that's what this was, almost a therapeutic exercise without, and I've talked to so many people who have read the book who similarly put themselves in that position and thought about what it would look like. Well, there was such freedom in realizing that, yes, the way you remembered it is the way you remembered it. And that was the truth at the time. As you look back on it, it's okay to say, but wait a second, she was just 10, she was just 15, she was just 25. And now that she's had life experience, so she did nothing wrong in remembering it. That was the absolute truth for her. But there's nothing wrong, with saying, wait, emotionally for me now, I can see it differently. That is very healing if you give yourself that leeway to remember, because memories are malleable, as you said. They're
Mm-hmm.
based on who is doing the remembering or the actual experiencing of the memory initially. And those are two separate things.
Mm. And now we see things, as you say, now we see things from different angles and with different experiences and through different lenses. And while when we're younger, it's much easier, I think, to be critical, especially of our parents and the way they behaved or things they've done. As you say somewhere, only once you become a parent and went through life and experienced more and also dug deeper and started thinking about what have they experienced, how were they treated as children, what have they experienced in their life, suddenly we start seeing these memories through very, very different lenses and realizing maybe I shouldn't have been that critical. Maybe it softens everything.
I think it does softens, and that's what time does anyway. But I think it softens, like you said, because you're looking through the lens as an adult who is also a parent. And I think it's also important to note that, it's okay to say that memory was bad no matter what the period of time is you're looking back on it, and to own that truth that
Yeah,
that was not a good experience for you, regardless of the context of that
exactly.
experience. And I think that's one of the values of a memoir. And I think one of the things I like about my book and memoirs the best is, as publishing a book that's a memoir, is that it sets you free. And
It
it makes you
does.
realize that every life matters profoundly, profoundly enough to
Hmm.
share, profoundly enough to discuss, profoundly enough to, you know, take the layers off and look into it. And I think that's something in our world of exceptionalism with social media and other things, that those are things that celebrated. We lose sight of the fact that these real, messy, beautiful, tragic, triumphant lives matter profoundly to us and to the people who care about us.
Oh, Amy, how I've learned this through 180 episodes that I've done in this podcast and women I've interviewed. It's so fascinating because, I often get successful women with amazing stories like you, but then I get women who consider themselves just housewives, and my mom was just a housewife, and then they start talking and you start digging deeper into life experiences, and as you say, it doesn't have to all be flashy and sexy, to really be deep and very meaningful, but more than that, very inspiring to all of us, to the rest of us. We can really learn from everybody and everybody's life and
Right.
experiences.
And that's the power in memoirs, and that's the power in a
Yes,
podcast like this. I'm fascinated by your podcast that you
thank you.
focus on this mother-daughter relationship. I
Yeah,
mean, it fits
yeah,
well into my book, but I mean, this is a profoundly important relationship, and for you to discuss it and highlight
yeah,
it is inspiring,
yeah.
and I think it's probably moving and therapeutic for your listeners as well.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing I'd like to talk about with in regard to the book is this idea of, do we want to say reparenting? Because there's this very touching moment of big Amy talking to small Amy and telling her, "You'll be okay. Everything's going to be okay." And and this is such a important moment for all of us to try to do, and go back to the little us and look at them and say, it's all going to be fine.
Right. And that's the most moving part of the book for me. And writing that scene again was so healing because I really
Mm.
had to consider what was I going to say to her?
Yeah.
What was I going
What
to
do you
say?
tell her exactly?
Right. And what would you tell her?
Mm.
And what would you say to her? What would you say to yourself? And I think it's important, probably you could write it down. I mean, whatever your medium is, and think about that and really accept that and ponder that, because I think that's really important. And there's something so healing in it because it's about perspective, but to be loved, to love your younger self is to be able to connect and love your younger self is, I mean, off the charts, just an incredibly important, moving, profoundly, emotionally changing process.
It is. And as you say, you can do it in any shape and form. You can write about it, you can meditate, you can meet your younger self through your meditation, you can paint her, you can, I don't know, talk to your partner about her or your child. So there are very, very many different ways we can get in touch with that younger self and embrace her and send her that good energy.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, there's no blueprint. And I think that's the
No.
other thing about our culture is that we feel like this is the way to do it. Well, the way to do it is what's in your head. We just
Yeah.
have to believe ourselves just long enough to take one step forward. And that's super important.
Yes. Amy, tell me, before we start talking about mom, tell me a little bit about the other book, and or maybe even before you tell me about the other book, tell me about yourself and what is your life story? How did you get to write your books?
Right. Well, I didn't come to writing in the usual way. And actually, I got a business degree. I was in purchasing and logistics for years. And then my husband's job called and said, "Do you want to move to England for 3 years?" And we were in our 30s and we thought, oh, this is going to be a great adventure. We'll go. But we get to England. I have one small child and we're in this village. And didn't have a work visa, so I wasn't going to work. And I felt like that was a good sacrifice for the travel and everything we were going to do. But I realized the days are so long, Anna. Like, what was I going to do? So I went and took history classes at the local university because I love history, and completely fascinating. But that wasn't doing it for me. So I'd always written on the side. I'd always written short stories, but I didn't do anything with that because I was doing the whole other thing. And so, almost out of desperation, I started freelance writing because I needed something to hang on to, like an anchor. It takes you a while in another country, and you know all about this, to create, a community. And that first 6 months is difficult in another country. And so I wrote. And then by the time I got back, I was pregnant with our second child, and I had created a niche where I had replaced a lot of my salary, and it just went from there to where I was
That's
got my
amazing.
was yeah serious about enough about myself to write the first book, and so that's how I came to writing.
What happened with sports? How did you get
And
into sport?
yeah, and that was my first real, um, well, that was my biggest contract. And I have always loved sports. And so when I started the freelance writing, a friend of mine said, "Why don't you write about American college football? You'd be good at that." And I was like, "Oh." And that was a whole interesting story because a woman writing about American college football is a whole nother journey. But I started doing it, and then I ended up with a contract for a major, it's called the Bleacher Report in the United States. And I was their national columnist for college football. And the great joy of my life, though, because I enjoyed every second of that. And but yeah, so I got into that, and that was one of my footholds into serious writing, or
That's
serious,
fascinating.
but also I think I'm funny writing. That has to be said.
Amy, tell me about the one with the crazy title.
Oh, right, Dear Dana. Yeah, and that's just a story that happened to me. So memoiresque in that I wrote a story that chronicled this story about me reconnecting with an old Facebook friend. Reconnected with her after 35 years. We'd had no contact. I found out her son had cancer. I got inspired like a lightning bolt hit me in the head. I hadn't written anyone a letter in 30 years. I hadn't spoken to her in 30 years. So I just because I was concerned about her and felt so empathetic about her situation, I started sending her and her son handwritten cards at the hospital they were staying at in Memphis, Tennessee. And this was a total non-intentional story again. And so I start writing them just because I feel like I had to do something. And after about, I don't know, 2 months of that, the son passes away at only 15 years old, just complete tragedy. And I thought, well, what am I supposed to do now? Because I really felt like I should be writing the letter. So I can't really just leave her hanging, after sending these words about support, and then I just go off the radar. So I thought, well, I'll keep writing her, but I don't know where she lives. So I found out her husband was an attorney. I found his law office address. It's crazily, I started sending her letters there. And the whole thing is about different levels of me being crazy. And so she starts writing me back after about 6 months. And we spent 2 years, like 2019, being pen pals. And just, we didn't text, we didn't email. And it created this profound free space between the two of us. I didn't know when she was reading what I wrote. She didn't know. I ended up being her depository for her grief because I was a stranger on the other end of the mailbox. I looked at my life from the outside in. Again, it was super cathartic because I was writing about it. And it was we trusted each other. And the experience was so extraordinary that I thought, this is one girl from a list of 600 people, like one random girl that I knew 30 years ago for 6 weeks. Like, what other goodness, untapped goodness is in this list of people I'm supposed to be friends with? So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write everyone a letter. And so I thought I'd make it like 30 letters in, and get out. But when I got to 30 letters, I was like, wait a second, this is going to change my life. And so it took me 18 months, and I wrote 580 handwritten letters. And I literally, this has become my passion topic. I go around the country, I speak about it, I go on podcasts about it, and I talk about the absolute incredible power of writing someone a handwritten note and mailing it to them.
Well, let's get inspired. I used to do that. I stopped.
I letter wrote years and years ago, but people were so blown away by the letters. They were so impacted because it wasn't digital. It made me realize we have this tool in our human toolkits that's so full of hope. Because I wrote people who voted different and did different things I did, and it just didn't matter after we connected again individually.
Mm-hmm. And kids nowadays don't even learn how to write by their hands in certain schools. How sad is that? Let's go to Mama Sue. Will you tell me a little bit about her and her life?
Yeah, my mom grew up in Texas, in a much different era. She was born in 1940. So her first memory is being in San Diego, and not her first memory, one of her first solid memories was her dad was in a naval base, and she remembers the war being over, and moved back to Texas. So she's in the South in the United States, in a whole different environment, with a mother who was super oppressive, who expected perfection and wanted everybody to fit into the deal, like, be the debutante or whatever it is. And that wasn't really mom's thing. Mom was more of a tomboy, and so she tried to do all the things that she was supposed to do. Her parents were alcoholics, and she lived, what I believe was a difficult childhood under the guise of this suburban perfection.
Perfection. How many brothers or sisters did she have?
She had an older brother who
Mm-hmm.
died of cancer when she was in her 20s, and he was her ally, and so she lost her ally. She went to college for 2 years, but they took her out of college or university because they only had enough money to pay for one of them. They're obviously going to pay for the son, not the daughter. And I do feel like she was kind of marginalized her whole life without me really seeing it. There's a story she told
Yeah.
me that when her brother passed away, her grandmother, who she was very close to, said, "I don't know why it wasn't you." And so the emotional legacy of that is just horrific. But
Wow. Yeah.
but anyway, so she met my dad. Um, they got married and I do believe they loved each other very much. I mean, they had a 50 something plus year marriage, and but he was an engineer. It was the 60s they got married. She went right home and stayed at home, and she was a mom that she was, I don't think she was completely happy with, and I'm saying this from my perspective, which is unfair, but I don't think she would tell you this. She wasn't completely happy where she was, because did she want to be the upper middle class suburban wife in Texas? Did she want to be married to this great guy who was my dad? She always wanted to write, which is super ironic,
Yeah. Yeah.
and but she lived
How do
this
you
life
know that she told you that?
that she had a typewriter and she wanted to write about Hollywood nostalgia. She
Mm.
told she told us that. She was very good. She wrote poems that were hilarious. She's very
Mm.
funny. But she was a very present mom, a very, she was there every day. She was a mom who did all the things she was supposed to do. She ticked all the boxes. My relationship with her individually was probably the most troubled out of the three kids. I have an older sister and a younger brother. And then she went on to, live her life after us. And then she went on to live her life after my dad passed away.
How was her life after you?
She got some, part-time jobs. She worked at a school, and then she moved around, not moved around, but they moved locally. And she lived I think the typical post stay-at-home mom life. She
Mm-hmm.
just kept filling it with friends and family and those things. She's not a big traveler. She doesn't have a lot of hobbies. She just exercised and took care of her yard and, took good care of herself.
And you say somewhere in her book, I might have a quote, but oh, I have it. There was something missing. So everything's perfect in her life, but there's something missing because she didn't like herself.
Right. And I think she was, yeah, I think she didn't like herself. Maybe she had some issues with alcohol. And I think that was also because she didn't like herself. Was, I think she was always tied, and I know this now and looking back because we've discussed it, but she was always tied to a man in her life. It was her father who was in charge. It was her brother who was the more important person. It was my dad, who I loved, who was in charge, who drove everything. My dad wasn't a controlling man, but he definitely drove everything. And we saw when when my father passed away suddenly, right when this book came out, which again, ironic. My mother has become a different person. She's 85 now, and
Okay.
she misses dad. I mean, she loved him. They had a relationship like everybody else, like it was messy but beautiful all at the same time. But now she has defined who she is for the first time in her life. Now, the last 7 years of my mother's life, she's still living. She's decided. She goes and does what she wants to do, and she's her own person, and her light is so strong. And what a gift to be able to see that.
How fascinating is that? It tells you so much about our society and how women, less nowadays in the West, how oppressed they were and how programmed their lives were and how they were just lived lives that society dictated to them. And imagine now that you see this strong light at 80 something, imagine she was allowed to shine it from the
Right.
beginning on.
And I think
What a
that's why
waste of life.
she didn't
I'm
like herself
sorry, it
because
sounds cruel, but the society forced her to waste that light.
right. And she said that her and her friends had a conversation recently, and they said, I don't know why people like in our generation got married, like they didn't have sex before they got married. Like, what's that all about? Just don't get married then. And this
Yeah.
is an 85-year-old woman who grew up in the oppressed South. And I think the other thing, and the book really highlighted a lot of this for me, but more so as I watched her become her own person. But, under the guise of you have everything, you have a car, you have a husband with a great job, you have nice furniture, you're allowed to buy nice clothes and makeup. Look, you have jewelry. That all hides the real truth of someone's human experience. Like those things are all great, undoubtedly. And there's so much to be said for economic security, but that does not give someone peace. It does not. And we know that. But as a Western civilization, we're pretty hell bent on making that the goal in our lives.
I highlighted that section in a book where you talk about this very early on in the beginning of the book. And unfortunately, I haven't printed it out for myself, but I love it that you talk exactly about that. About we're becoming so busy just keeping ourselves content and having everything that we forget to live in a way. And
Right.
that is so important. That for me was, thank you for putting that immediately in the beginning of the book, because it's such an important message to our whole society.
Right. And thank you for highlighting that. And
Yeah, yeah,
it's funny how I really had made that connection till right now. That's kind of what my mother's life has taught me. Just that lesson at the beginning of the book, that just because this, and this doesn't equal her happiness, because her happiness
exactly.
has nothing to do with all that. Yes, she's
Yeah.
secure, but she's happy because she gets to be herself now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit in which way your relationship, you said you had the most difficult relationship with her out of all your siblings. How was it difficult?
And I say this with, it's hard though, because it's back to memories being malleable. But she has said this. I mean, she was harder on me than she was on my brother and sister. And I can only think that we're probably alike. And she saw something in me that she didn't like in herself. And I was my dad's favorite. And I doubt that she liked that either. And so she was tough on me, but I think I was very difficult for her because, one of the major themes of the book, and I present it as funny, is that I probably should have been on ADHD medicine at 10 because I was just a handful. And she was trying to manage me in this world where everything was supposed to fit into what her mother thought was right.
Mm.
And so I was difficult. And that doesn't make me a bad kid, but it made me a bad fit for my mother's time in life.
Mm.
And so since she didn't like herself or hadn't found herself or wasn't able to, and then I was just like all over the place. I didn't help. I was a tomboy. I didn't help make her situation any easier. And I'm sure that's why I felt like I was the least loved. And I don't, and then now I know she loved me probably just as much. It was just, I was a problem for her within the context of her life.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the lessons. What
Okay.
do you feel are the most important things you've learned from her?
Well, I think my mom, because of her experience, my whole life, regardless of the dynamics of our relationship, she has been the why not girl. Like, I'm like, Mom, I'm going to write a book. Why wouldn't you do that? Mom, I'm going to write people handwritten letters. I'm going to write 600 handwritten letters. Why wouldn't you do that? Of course you should do that. She basically tells me all the time, don't leave anything on the table. I left too much on the table. I didn't go follow through on any of that. And, you need to go do that. Why wouldn't you do that? And then she'll always say, I'll be your agent. I get 10%. That's what she always says at the end of everything because she's funny, but why not? Why
Yeah.
wouldn't you do that? And so that is a legacy. Before my dad died, I always saw that as he was the outside of the box guy. He was the guy who motivated me. But I realize now that my mom saw it in me and her why not
Mm.
was even more powerful because we didn't have that close bond. That why not probably made me hold on and do everything I've done.
Mm. That's fascinating. My mom was like that a little bit also, and I just appreciate it so much. What's the worst thing that can happen? She would say,
Well,
"You can
and
get a no."
yeah, it's
You
great
can say
advice
no.
though.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Tell me more. Do you have another lesson?
Yeah, and I think just watching her, and I said as she's aged after my dad, there's such hope in realizing that my story as my story right now is not my whole story. Like I can have a profound right turn. I have a great life, but I'm saying what's up ahead of me. It's just she's made me realize that I'm not defined by anything in my life. Like there is something ahead of me that has not been defined yet, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And the way she's lived and she's lived bravely, in both circumstances, I think that I think that's an important lesson. And tying into that, you know, she she has told me I have a wonderful husband and we have a wonderful, again, marriage is screwed up and messed up and it should be. It's a messed up, wonderful relationship. But she has told me over and over again, your husband's wonderful. I love him, but don't let yourself and your situation be controlled like mine. You
Mm.
have to stand up for yourself. She said, whether you want to or not, you have to be deliberately standing up for yourself. And I think it's back to like, I'm not defined by whatever the box is around me right now. I can come out of
Mm-hmm.
that. And she tells me that all the time. Like we're working on a big building project right now, my husband and I. And she's like, if you
Mm-hmm.
want tile floors, you got to just stand up and say, I got to have tile floors. And she's so passionate about it because she lived another life.
She lived another life. Yeah. Yep. Do you have another one?
Yeah, one more, and this is probably the biggest for me. And mom's 85. She grew up in a different time period than I did, than my children did. And we've had some stuff happen in my family where, people have chosen to boldly be themselves in a way that we didn't expect. I mean, it's a personal thing. So, I mean, a personal to that person, but have decided to identify in a different way. And I was so afraid. We were all so afraid of what our 85-year-old mother was going to think of this individual and what they did. And my mom, the first time I talked to her about it, and it's obviously a person that's very close to all of us in the family who's very dear to us. And they decided, they were going to identify as a different gender, basically. And my mom said, I've always felt like that's who that person was. My 85-year-old mother who grew up in the South of Texas. She said, I don't see what the big deal is.
Oh,
And
wow.
and she has taught me, Anna, that I can be open-minded for the rest of my life, and I'm not defined by time period I was ridden. I grew up in. My call in life is to be driven by love, like my mother. And if I would have ever thought I would have said that 25 years ago, I would have thought I was smoking crack, but I'm not. And that's what my mother's taught me. And that's probably the best lesson. And I think this last 7 years has been so sweet because of that, because we've got to see who mom is just a powerhouse of love and grace. And I never knew that. What a gift.
But Amy, do you think she would have reacted the same way had she been 30, 40, 50? Do you think age brings with age we embrace, as you say, it
Yeah.
sounds kitschy, being powered by love and being like, why not? And of course they should be whatever they want to be. And do we become more relaxed with age, or do you think she was just always like that?
I think there has to be, just because, I don't know, the culture we live in over here, everything is so against everything. I think
Yeah.
part of it's age, but I think part of it is is based on her experience and who she actually is. She grew up in the racial driven 50s and 60s here in the South, and she had told me even when I was a kid that she always pushed back against that. She never agreed with
Mm-hmm.
it. So I do think it's a part of who she is, but
Mm-hmm.
I do think that boldness is absolutely enhanced with age. And I think the boldness is the part that came with age, but I think that deep core value of, this is who we are, and that's that's perfect. I think that's just who she is, probably.
Yeah. I'm asking you about this because I'm noticing this boldness coming up for me. I'm only 50. But it's so beautiful. I talk to my friends a lot about this, and this is one thing I really think we should highlight as we age, as something to look forward to. This no nonsense thing, and this just daring to embrace things and be bold, and of course opening up to things and experiences. No
Right.
nonsense.
And maybe this is, you're getting up on, I'm 57. Maybe we're at the best part of life and we just don't know it because
Exactly.
because of the memories and the experience and the boldness and the, this is the part where, I don't we make a difference like you do with your podcast and your books. I don't know. This is a pivotal point in our lives. And I've been on some midlife podcasts, and I think embracing it and being like, let's go, like,
Let's go.
woo,
Yeah.
as opposed to saying, oh my gosh, I'm growing a mustache and let's have no shave November,
Well, let's go with mustache.
Yeah, right, right. But this is the part where we boldly get to be what we want to be. This is like junior high school, only no one cares anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah, totally. Amy, what was something you wish she had taught you? Something important in life you had to learn yourself?
Oh, that's a tough question. I wish there would have been a way for mom to tell me in my late teens and my early 20s, some of the things she's told me since then, because I think I would have lived a much different early marriage. And I think I would have had a much different handle on myself if she could have shared some of her experiences earlier. If she could have sat me down and said, here's the thing, and I don't think she was in a position to do that. But, and I'm so glad you asked that question, because it might be something I just need to do with my own kids, like a call to action, because I wish some of the things I know now, and I know without age, some of this can't happen. Without my own age, some of these revelations can't happen, but it wouldn't hurt to sit my kids down and tell them some of that. What I wish I would have heard from her earlier, because I think I would have navigated my own life more easily, and maybe more boldly.
Yes, yes. And this is partially what this podcast is about, these lessons and experiences and life stories that we need to share, as you say, in order to guide the young people to be aware of what we should be sharing.
Right.
I think we've covered it, Amy. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just want to thank you, because it's very rare that you go into one of these, you're talking about a book or a relationship. I feel like this was a moving and changing, transformative experience. So I thank you for that personally.
Thank you so much. And so was your book.
Thank you so
Even
much.
my 11-year-old thinks that. I told him about the concept of the book and he was like, oh my God, that's cool.
That's amazing. What a compliment. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Amy, again. If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider, that's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.